Is your child's daycare safe? FOX10 News Investigates digging into new religious-based daycare inspection reports to answer that question.
FOX10 News Investigative reporter Katie Weiss joins us now in studio with a very disturbing story, especially if you have a child in one of those religious-based daycares. Katie?
Yeah, no doubt about that, Byron. After a child died in the hands of a religious daycare in Mobile County last summer, we wanted to know, how are these daycares keeping your kids safe? Religious daycares that receive federal funding on the Gulf Coast are beginning to be inspected for the very first time by DHR thanks to a recent federal law. So we asked for copies of all of the inspection reports for all of the daycares in Mobile and Baldwin counties which fall in that category. I took a close look at the fine print and found some disturbing conditions at many of the daycares listed in this stack. In the last 20 years, 4 children in Mobile County have died while under daycare supervision. 5-year-old Camden Johnson is the most recent victim. Police say he was left in a hot van by a daycare worker. His body was dumped along Demetropolis Road.
It was pure devastation.
In 2005, 2-year-old Amaya White died after a worker left her in a daycare van. 3 years earlier, in 2002, 10-week-old Douglas Hernandez died after his daycare drugged him without his parents' consent.
We just broke down and cried. We thought how my son must have suffered.
And in 1998,
they need to be held accountable.
Alicia Coleman's life was turned upside down when she got the news her 3-year-old son, Demyrian Lindley, was killed after his daycare left him in a hot church van for 10 hours.
I really thought it was a nightmare. I couldn't wrap my mind around that. Like, my child will never come back home. Like, I'll never see my child again.
Demyrian's daycare was the First Baptist Church of Baltimore Street in Mobile. Daycare worker Chinavian Daly was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and sentenced to a year in jail. But the daycare remained open. Because of its religious affiliation, the daycare isn't licensed by the state. But thanks to a recent federal law, the Alabama Department of Human Resources inspected it for the first time just a few months ago because it receives federal funding. Records obtained by FOX10 News Investigates show DHR found 181 violations in that inspection.
Heart-wrenching, very upsetting. Oh my God, that's unbelievable.
The report shows a wide variety of problems, from the outdoor play area having hazardous conditions to children not being supervised at all times.
Another child could possibly lose their life there. How are they still open and operating with all those violations?
DHR doesn't fine facilities for violations, but instead gives them a deadline to make changes. If there's no improvement, they could lose their government funding. A DHR spokesperson tells me that hasn't happened yet.
Because, we're not trying to close anybody down. We want the facilities to be available, but we want them to be safe.
The pastor of the First Baptist Church of Baltimore Street declined to speak on camera, but he tells FOX10 News his daycare has made appropriate changes. 77 other unlicensed daycares in Mobile and Baldwin counties are now inspected because of the federal funding they receive. So we wanted to see what inspectors found. All the reports were filled out by hand, so we created a computer database to make better sense of the information. After spending days tallying the information listed in the reports, we found some startling numbers. The reports show 8,000 total violations. 35 daycares had more than 100 violations, and 5 had more than 200. I showed our findings to Janetta Green, DHR's Director of Child Care Services.
I think the evaluation and doing the monitoring visits kind of brought to the forefront that need was there.
Some of the most common violations include shelves and equipment not being properly anchored. They could fall and injure children. And hazardous substances not locked up, and the outdoor play areas containing hazardous conditions like protruding nails, active ant beds, and hornets' nests, just to name a few examples. The most common problem, though, proper staff-to-children ratios were not maintained at all times. In fact, 18 different facilities were found in violation for not having all children supervised at all times.
Some of the things may not be necessarily that a staff member was not in that room, but it may be that the staff member was not paying the proper attention to what was going on in the room, and that's when some things could happen.
Nearly 30 daycares were in violation for not keeping transportation checklists, which could make sure that all children are accounted for, something that could have prevented Camden Johnson's death. We found even more issues with staff. 6 different facilities had staff members with records of misconduct. What does that mean, records of misconduct?
It goes to what that facility is doing prior to employing a staff to make sure that that staff person has nothing in their history that would perhaps make them unsuitable to care for children.
What would you say is the most concerning violation to you?
For us, all the violations are concerning because we would not list them as things that we want them to adhere to if we didn't think there was always the potential of something serious happen to a child.
DHR says some of those daycares have made appropriate fixes, but some others are still not up to par.
They need to get it together.
Some lawmakers in Montgomery are starting to see the need for stronger regulations. Representative Peblin Warren sponsored a bill that has just become law. It will require all religious daycares receiving state or federal funding to be licensed by 2019. And it requires all facilities, no matter their exemption or funding status, to conduct background checks on employees.
I think the poorest child in this state deserves quality, health, and safety where it comes to daycares.
But DHR says there are still about 500 daycares across Alabama which are both religious affiliated and do not receive government money that will continue to operate without DHR inspections. What would you say to some critics who are saying that your bill is not enough to protect children?
Well, those I would say it's progress. Things don't happen overnight.
Warren first tried to push for all daycares across the state to be inspected, but that plan failed. Senator Greg Albritton, who represents northern Baldwin County and Clark County, voted no. Why would you vote against something that would ultimately help protect children?
Well, there's 2 particular reasons that prompted me to take that stand. It makes me uncomfortable to have the church report its religious teachings and such to the state. Number 2 is money. The state now has the obligation to go in, do inspections, and there's no money in the bill to provide for that.
DHR says because of the federal law going into effect, it already increased its budget by $426,000 last year. The agency tells me it will need $238,000 more to pay for the new state requirements passed this year. Both legislators tell me they will be monitoring how the new state law goes and will likely revisit the issue in the next legislative session. For parents like Alicia Coleman, more stringent laws can't come soon enough.
I really hope that they will make this law effective to everyone across the board, whether they get federal funding or not. They need to get it together before they lose another child.
And we have created an interactive map so you can see how many violations and what kinds of violations were found at your child's religious daycare. And if your child's daycare is not on our map, that means it's either licensed by DHR or it's not licensed and it doesn't receive federal funding. You can also learn more about those kinds of daycares on our website. You can check all of that out right now on fox10tv.com.
Unsettling numbers. Unsettling numbers. Now, you also have some new information to share with the folks about Camden Johnson's daycare, right?
Yes, that's right. I spoke with the DHR spokesperson earlier today, and they tell me that so far, since November of 2017, Camden Johnson's daycare has been totally in compliance. And that's Community Nursery and Preschool Academy on Hillcrest Road. They've been totally in compliance since November 2017.
Good. Katie, thanks very much.